cell death on aging and chronic diseases. We're going to describe C15 or pentadecanoic acid and why it meets the criteria of being an essential fatty acid and the mechanisms of action relevant to metabolic, heart, and liver health. We're then going to help you understand the C15's evolutionary role in supporting mammalian longevity, thanks to dolphins, providing some insights, and how the cellular stability hypothesis explains how C15 can extend longevity not only across species, mammalian species, but individuals. We'll then describe cellular fragility syndrome, which we just, Dr. Melvin, as you just shared, we just published less than 2 weeks ago, which is the first nutritional deficiency syndrome discovered in 75 years, and how this deficiency syndrome accelerates aging and the onset and progression of metabolic liver and cardiovascular diseases. And then finally, to understand why we have nutritional C15 deficiencies affecting, we believe, as many as 1 in 3 people globally, how to test for C15 to identify low, healthy, and optimal levels, and most importantly, how to fix them. We'll talk about some dietary options as well as supplements as well. So with that, let's get into story mode, right? So if we look at our health and the health of your patients, I think we all know that our health is heading in the wrong direction. So despite all these advancements in medicine, a lot of effort being spent on how can we live to 180, 200 years old, which is all wonderful and very exciting, but what's happening in the real world is, our longevity is decreasing. So something is happening that's putting us in the wrong direction. And we've been starting to see over the past 10, 15 years, aging-associated diseases increasing, especially among younger people. And when I say younger, people less than 50. So at 52, I'm conveniently putting myself on the better side, but something has been happening, people younger than 50. Specifically, we are seeing an increase in coronary heart disease among people 18 to 44 years old. For a long time, right? For decades, we were seeing a decrease in heart disease in people. And suddenly around 2017, 18, increases specifically, again, among this younger age set. The incidence of type 2 diabetes, specifically less than people 20 years old, has been increasing exponentially. You remember type 2 diabetes used to be called adult onset diabetes, right? And type 1 diabetes was juvenile onset diabetes. It used to be really rare for a child, a youth, somebody who was young to get type 2 diabetes. We're now seeing that increase. That amount is expected to increase by 673% in this age group by the year 2030. Not only for the type 2 diabetes, not only is it showing up, but and growing, but it's more aggressive. So they're actually finding that these younger people that are getting type 2 diabetes have a higher risk of death than even children with type 1 diabetes. So it's a very aggressive form. And then non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which of course is undergoing a name change, but for this sake of this presentation, I'm going to keep calling it NAFLD versus MASLD. But NAFLD showed up out of nowhere. In 1980, the Mayo Clinic published a paper in which they reported 20 individuals who had this strange presentation of fatty liver disease that mimicked alcoholic liver disease, but they were confident that this risk factor was not due to alcohol consumption. So they called it non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, or NASH, and those were the first 20 to 30 patients in 1980. Fast forward to today, and now 1 in 3 people globally have non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, the precursor to NASH, including 1 in 10 children. So it's pretty shocking how much this condition has increased exponentially. We're talking about, just as they go to review the global data and publish the next paper on the trends, it's gone from 1 in 5 to 1 in 4 to 1 in 3 with each subsequent publication. So then with among all of this, a new type of cell death emerged, and it's called ferroptosis. So, back in our cell biology days, we were taught there are 3 ways that our cells die, right? It's apoptosis, necrosis, and autophagy. And a team of scientists from Columbia University identified a 4th form of cell death, and they called it ferroptosis. And since it was their initial publication in 2012, there have been over 10,000 peer-reviewed scientific papers on ferroptosis. The level of detail with regard to the pathways and the genes is incredible over these 10,000 papers. Despite all this science, nobody has been able to explain why ferroptosis showed up. And what is causing it. So it's been very difficult to figure out how to treat it. I'm just going to go in a little bit deeper on ferroptosis. It is a non-apoptotic form of cell death. This is how it is defined by the folks at Columbia University when they discovered it. It starts with fragile lipids, fragile fatty acids in the cell membranes. Right, our cell membranes are made of a lipid bilayer, and the fatty acids within those bilayers, if they are fragile, that leads to lipid peroxidation. Now, when we're talking about fragile fatty acids, these are fatty acids that have double bonds in them, and that every extra double bond they have, increased risk of attack by oxygen and lipid peroxidation. So fatty acids that have double bonds are those that we call unsaturated fatty acids. And those that have multiple double bonds are called polyunsaturated fatty acids. So the more of those that we have in our cell membranes, the more fragile they get, the more susceptible they are to lipid peroxidation. So then this is the first part of it. The second part is that iron is strangely showing up inside of cells. That's free iron. And when that free iron then combines with lipid peroxidation, that results in massive reactive oxygen species creation. And as the ROS increases, that then attacks the mitochondria and results in the cell death. So when you look at the cell under the microscope, it is a slightly thickened cell membrane with a nucleus that looks just fine, so non-apoptotic, and but the mitochondria are dead. So, and there's iron inside. So it's a very distinct presentation that we see with ferroptosis. From there, now we know, because of all of this work, right, that ferroptosis causes accelerated aging. And it's basically accelerating the process of aging-related degradation at the cellular level. It is also leading to earlier onset and more aggressive chronic conditions, including type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and NAFLD and NASH. So while all of this is happening, this feels so gloomy and doomy, but I promise we'll get hopeful here real quick. At the same time, especially in the US, our lifespans are decreasing. And what's important is that all of the things I'm talking about, this happened before COVID, right? So this is when around 2016, 17, 18, we started seeing these trends happening. And 2012, ferroptosis is discovered. And we were already seeing our life expectancy kind of plateau out and then head down. And then we got hit with COVID, which arguably we had super susceptible population that were more fragile to an added threat, right, which was COVID-19. So interestingly, so a lot of explanations with regard to these trends have been, with regard to diet and food are increased sugar, increased trans fatty acids, too many ultra processed foods, and those are probably reasonable contributors to what it is that we're seeing. But while all this was happening, I was in San Diego enjoying a stint with the Navy Dolphins. And this was 20 years ago, 20 some years ago. And I had been with this Navy dolphin population, and that's where introducing myself, right, as a veterinary epidemiologist, was invited by the Navy 20 years ago to apply veterinary epidemiology to understand chronic health in their dolphin population. So the Navy has cared for a population of about 100 bottlenose dolphins for over 60 years. They live in the open ocean in San Diego Bay. They go out in the ocean every day. Every day they choose to come back. It's really incredible population. Because they get such good care, Navy dolphins live a lot longer than dolphins in the wild. So a wild dolphin on average lives to 20 years. Dolphins at the Navy routinely live 40 to 50 years. So after I had been there for about, 5 or 6 years, the Navy has had this growing population of geriatric dolphins. And we started seeing an increase in a syndrome. And this included NAFLD and NASH, like phasic increases in liver enzymes, high cholesterol and triglycerides, insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome. We were seeing this dysmetabolic iron overload syndrome in which iron was depositing in the liver. They had hyperferritinemia, chronic inflammation, anemia, and even the full suite of changes in the brain consistent with Alzheimer's disease. So, and importantly, it wasn't all the dolphins were getting this syndrome, only a subset. And interestingly, about 1 in 3 were developing some component of this syndrome. So that then triggered us to, we were afforded the luxury, right, that we have a large-brained, long-lived mammalian population that are well-controlled. All they eat are fish. So we were able to go back into their archived serum because wonderfully, they collect blood on the dolphins as often as once a month and as rarely as once a quarter just as a routine health checkup. They measure 44 different clinical indices on every test. They have kept those blood records archived in electronic medical records since the 1990s and archived the serum of the dolphins and saved all the tissues that when dolphins passed on. So we were able then to come in to this amazingly rich resource and be able to use advanced metabolomics to be able to evaluate thousands of small molecules present in both the dolphin serum and in their all fish diet to figure out which small molecules might be predicting dolphins with or without this condition. And that's where we discovered, and to be honest, we went in with a biased approach where we just assumed it would be omega-3s, that higher omega-3s in their fish would predict the healthier aging dolphins. And instead we were proven wrong, and it was C15 that came out of this, of these initial studies, that dolphins with higher C15 in their blood had a lower risk of having these conditions, and as well as higher C15 in their diets. I guess important to call out here is that dolphins at the Navy are fed 5 different types of fish. 3 types of the fish were absent of C15, and 2 types had higher C15. Different dolphins were fed different proportions of these fish. So we accidentally had dolphins that were getting a higher C15 diet versus a C15 deficient diet. So while we were making these discoveries and publishing all of this work in the peer-reviewed literature about all these conditions in dolphins that were mimicking those in humans, as well as this discovery with C15, it ends up the same story was playing out in humans, that multiple studies, now meta-analyses, so studies of longitudinal cohort studies showing that people with lower C15, both dietary and circulating C15, have a higher risk of developing type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, including especially coronary heart disease and heart failure, NAFLD, NASH, certain cancer types, and anemia. So all of a sudden it was like, there's what's happening here, and is this more than just association?